there we see, there we see the connection and the tension between this collective and individual human experience. And then finally, ultimately, Orwell does not explicitly tell us how to think, but rather subtly and unconsciously invites us to reflect on the integrity of our own human experiences through exploring the power of language, memory and truth, and binary human emotions. So in that last sentence, we've alluded to how he does this. So how does he give us questions to think upon? Well, through exploring the power of language, memory and truth, and binary human emotions. And essentially they're going to be the paragraphs that we're exploring throughout the essay. Okay. If a question says to evaluate a statement, do you just have to implement the quote into your response, or do you have to explicitly state your opinion on the statement? For example, do we have to say, I strongly believe? Okay, so that's a very good question. I think with English, it's, you don't necessarily have to give a statement that says, I believe that this is true, etc. It's kind of good to have something a little bit more nuanced to show, like as you're going through your essay, you should be able to kind of, what you're writing should insinuate that you either agree or disagree with the statement. So yeah, by saying that he encapsulates the purpose of a storyteller, by giving us a question to think upon, we're kind of alluding to the fact that, yes, that statement is true. I hope that answered your question. Another question was is it okay to mention Orwell in the first sentence of the paragraph? I know that sometimes they say the first sentence should be directly answering the question without actually bringing in your text yet. I think as long as you're, as long as the sentence isn't too wordy and you're still giving a clear answer, you can mention Orwell. Particularly for this question, it's the role of a storyteller. Your storyteller is Orwell. It's definitely relevant. A quick question, what is the difference between assess and evaluate? So they're very similar. They're both judgment questions. They're the higher order questions. So yeah, basically there isn't a super distinct difference, but assess is more about a criteria, whereas I think evaluate is kind of like the final answer and a personal judgment, like to whether you think something is true or not. But yeah, they're pretty similar. Okay. Sorry. Okay, we've got another like little example of how you might choose to structure an intro, and this one is a bit more prescriptive, but you still want to make sure you're answering the question. I know you can see the question, you can become really overwhelmed. How am I going to respond to this? There's so much to think about. So yeah, if you are after something a bit clearer to go into the exam with, you might just say sentence 1 or 2, the thesis statement. Then something about context is definitely important. Context, form, genre, all of that. And then a sentence on each paragraph you'll be exploring, but making sure you're answering the question and also ensuring that those paragraphs you use in your intro aren't just a repeat of your topic sentences, because you don't want to be seeming repetitive. You still want to be, everything you say should be worthwhile, and you've got very limited time, so you want to be really selective with what you're saying and make sure you're not just repeating your stuff. Okay, and note that if it's a how question, so if it's saying, how does your novel evoke this emotion, for example, how means language, features, and textual elements. So if you get a question like that, you're going to want to give a few examples in your introduction, even though that seems kind of unconventional to bring in these techniques in the intro. It's very related to the question. You're not going to be analyzing them per se, but it's just going to be kind of setting up what are the main features that your author uses to convey certain meaning. Okay. Got another question. For an essay, is it better to do 2 extended detailed body paragraphs rather than 3 body paragraphs? I think since you have 45 minutes for the common module, you definitely want to be aiming for 3 body paragraphs. So is the features just regularly integrated to evoke my ideas? I'm not really sure what you mean by that. But yeah, you always, if it's a how question, you always want to be coming back to these features. If you want to clarify what you mean by that, can you give us examples of a feature? Yes, of course. So a feature is tone, structure. So I know Orwell, for example, uses a 3-part structure. That's an overarching feature. He, uses the motif of Big Brother, things like that. They're all features. It essentially means a technique. Okay. Topic sentences. So it's super important that you are avoiding pre-written topic sentences. You might have some kind of analysis memorized, but it's all about answering the question, and your topic sentence should directly answer the question by using the keywords from the question. Abstract nouns are a really cool way to frame your topic sentences. They're essentially themes for each paragraph. So if we look to, I think I can get, okay. So down here, you can see these are some binary abstract nouns. And by using these contrasting themes, you're able to engage with the idea of inconsistencies, paradoxes, anomalies, and show the marker how you're considering these new perspectives, and show that you have a really considered personal understanding of each of these themes. So we've got a little example here. The paradoxes of Orwell's story invite us to reflect on the inconsistencies in the human experience. The motivation of comfort is paradoxically found in conformity. So we can see how comfort and conformity are kind of 2 opposing ideas, and we've brought them together with paradoxically, and that's going back to the inconsistency. So inconsistency, paradoxes, anomalies are obviously all linked. Paradox is a statement that seemingly contradicts itself, but is logically viable. An inconsistency is something that deviates from the norm, and an anomaly is an outlier. So they're all alluding to similar things, but yeah, make sure you have a clear understanding of each of those and how they are different from each other. We can also consider verbs and how they're used to show this opposing, the idea of opposing elements. So some examples there: expand versus diminish, frighten versus embolden, reduce, transform, etc. And then we have, in assuming the role of a storyteller, Orwell questions the power of language to both fulfill and curtail the human motivations for self-expression and introspective thought. So clearly fulfill and curtail are binary verbs, and we're relating them to the human motivation, so engaging with the rubric for self-expression and introspective thought. And obviously you'll go through an analysis as you write your paragraph, but yeah, they're just some examples of topic sentences. Could they ask a question specifically on paradoxes, anomalies, etc.? And how would we answer that? So yeah, the thing is with the rubric, they can be really specific, or they can be quite broad and ask you to link a range of those dot points that you saw earlier. So I remember when I did the HSC, we got a question which was just on loneliness. So one single emotion, literally as niche as it can go. Other times, we're asked very generally about the collective and the individual human experience. We're asked how your author represents the inconsistencies in human behavior. And even though those things might be very specific, we still want to engage generally with the rubric, go back to everything we spoke about earlier: qualities, emotions, inconsistencies in behavior, collective versus individual. So don't let the fact that it's a niche question scare you, because you can still find links to these overarching and broad ideas. So yeah, if you're asked a question specifically on paradoxes, anomalies, think of ways that paradoxes and anomalies link to things like human behavior and motivations, individual and collective, etc. So for example there, comfort in conformity. Comfort is an element of the individual human experience, and conformity might be an element of the collective human experience, and you're kind of suggesting the connection between the two. Okay. So when you're analyzing, you want to make sure you're not just retelling and describing the plot of your novel or your text. So you want to use an active voice as opposed to a passive voice. I've got an example here to show you what I mean by this. So the party attempts to preserve their power by destroying the relationship between Winston and Julia. This suggests that love is a threat as an emotion that motivates personal defiance and a collective desire for freedom. Then we have the party's destruction of honest connections to preserve their power represents love as a threat, an emotion that motivates individual defiance and a collective desire for freedom. They're saying the same thing, but we can see in the second example, it's a lot more succinct. By transforming the verb destroy to an abstract noun, destruction, we're avoiding falling into this retail trap. And by using a more active verb such as represent instead of suggest, we're analyzing with the ways your author depicts these ideas. Another quick sign you might be using a passive voice is the word by. So if you see you using that word a lot, try to reframe your sentences to avoid that if you can. It's just like a little thing, but it can really help elevate your analysis. And yeah, I imagine you guys, as we are coming up to the exam, you've probably got your ideas and you've got your analysis. Now it's just about using your language in the most precise and eloquent way to articulate your ideas. And that's really what's going to help you get this band 6. Okay. So I know I've answered a few questions as I've gone, but if anyone has any more questions that they want me to answer, just put them in the chat and I'll see how I go. I had another question here. What is the recommended number of techniques per paragraph? It's hard to say an exact number, but if the way you want to be writing your paragraphs is making your analysis quite fluid. You're showing links between the different features. So how does a motif work with the structure? How does the perspective work with characters, etc.? So it's hard to say a specific number of techniques, but if you're using a combination of these overarching techniques and specific quotes, I'd say you want at least 5 for one paragraph and aiming for 3 paragraphs per response. How many words do you think we should roughly have? Okay, this is a good question. Once again, it's hard to say, but it's definitely quality over quantity. It depends on how much you can write in 45 minutes. I would say you want at least 1,000 words, but if you're writing 1,000 words of not so good English versus 800 words of really quality, eloquent writing, it's going to be much more valuable. What's the best way to tailor the analysis you have memorized for the question? Okay, so you might be memorizing your features and your quotes, but to make sure your analysis answers the question, you just want to be using words or synonyms for those words that are in the question in your analysis. So if we go back to if we go back to this example, say the question was about motivations. How do paradoxes, how does your author reflect inconsistencies and paradoxes in human motivations? You're going to be wanting to use the word motivate, motivations, and synonyms for that word in your analysis. What if you can't write 1,000 words? Can I still get high with a good quality 800 word answer? Yes, 100%. That's what I was just saying. It's quality over quantity. You can still achieve a very high mark with little words. So I wouldn't get so caught up on that. You just want to make sure you're going into enough detail though, and not just giving broad statements without explaining them and giving proper examples for what your for what your topic sentences and theses are. How many words do you think you had? I think for my common module essay, I had around 1,200 words. And then for my other modules, which allocated 40 minutes, I had about 1,000 words. But yeah, it really depends. What is usually part of a quality essay? Part of a quality essay is answering the question. That's the most important thing. And engaging with that question throughout your analysis, not just trying to fit in the question in your topic sentence and the link back to the question in your last sentence of your paragraph. You want to be really answering the question as you're analyzing, like I said, by using those keywords in the question throughout your paragraph as well. Can you get full marks for short answer questions by using and analyzing broad techniques like structure? Yes, you definitely can. Techniques like structure and genre are just as important as little specific quotes. And if anything, they show you have a broad understanding of the, they show you have a broad understanding of the piece. So yeah, I think that was related to comprehension. But it is good to have a balance. So thinking about these specific features as well as these overarching features. How do you judiciously select quality quotes, or is it all in the way you analyze it? Quality quotes have to be related to your point. I think that's the most important thing. a quote means nothing if you haven't explained its meaning and how it relates to what you're arguing. So yeah, that's how you want to be selecting your features. Is it recommended to use more simple techniques? Oh yeah, so for comprehension, you can like have these really quirky, unique techniques, but essentially a technique is a technique. And if it's been used in the piece, it's just as valid as like some technique, some obscure technique that not everyone will know about. So yeah, obviously you want to differentiate yourself, but don't use techniques where you don't really know what they are and you don't know why they're used. So, okay. Can you get full marks for short answer questions by using it? Oh yeah, I think I answered that. Okay, cool. I think I've answered most of those questions. So I'll move on to the next module now. Oh, there were just some other ones on the chat. If you're running out of time, do you recommend cutting the analysis short or writing a conclusion or just continue writing? Okay, if you're running out of time in your third paragraph and you haven't finished wrapping up that paragraph and getting to the conclusion, I definitely sacrifice a little bit of analysis to write a strong linking sentence and a strong conclusion, because that's what that's the note that you're going to leave the marker with, and you want that note to be a really strong one. A sentence that is like cut off halfway through analysis isn't really leaving the marker with the strongest feel for your writing ability. Okay. How did you manage time well? Okay, yeah, I'm like not the best with time management. It was really something that I had to work on, but you need to be watching the time as you're writing your paragraphs, thinking, okay, I'm going to devote 10 minutes to this paragraph. As soon as the clock hits 3:15 after 10 minutes, I'm moving on. I'm wrapping up the paragraph. It's okay if I haven't mentioned one of these techniques that I really wanted to. I'm moving on and I'm going to the next point. So just be really strict with yourself and have clear increments of time that you want to devote to each point. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next module now. So for module A, textual conversations. The key words in the rubric, we've got resonances, dissonances, reframing, reimagining, and how aspects of a text might mirror, align, or collide with details of the other text. We'll go through all these terms in a moment. Common and disparate issues, values, assumptions, perspectives, how the personal, social, cultural, and historical contextual knowledge influences text and the meaning that is shaped in these texts. Analyzing how language concepts such as motif, allusion, intertextuality, and others connect and distinguish text, and how innovating with language concepts, form, and style can shape new meaning, and a considered personal perspective. So once again, making sure that you're still offering your own judgment and reflecting on these ideas personally. Okay. So we have some of these language concepts that were mentioned in the rubric. So allusion, for example, is a deliberate and implicit reference to a person or event or a work of art which draws on knowledge and experiences shared by the composer and the responder. So we can see there that it's a conversation between the composer and the responder. So that responder might be you as a reader, and it also might be the responder of your second text. So the conversation essentially between the two composers. And then for intertextuality, we have the associations and connections between one text and other texts. Intertextual references can be more or less explicit and self-conscious. They can take the form of direct quotation, parody, allusion, or structural borrowing. So allusion is a form of intertextuality. And by the way, those definitions come from the glossary of your syllabus. So that's a really good place to go if you're a bit confused about what a language concept or feature is. They've got really good definitions for lots of features and concepts. So why do we want to analyze intertextuality? Well, it allows us to consider these common or disparate issues, perspectives, values, and assumptions. They might show how grand narratives or meta-narratives, so these are like historical stories, are disturbed or appraised. And we can reflect on resonances and dissonances and how one text might mirror, align, or collide with the other. So just in terms of mirror, align, and collide, mirror and align are obviously quite similar and they're alluding to resonances, but they are a bit different. Mirror, if we're looking at the synonyms for mirror, we've got stuff like reflecting, echoing, paralleling. It's kind of a closer connection, whereas align is something's lining up with another thing. It might not be as closely connected, but the connection is still there nonetheless. So align, you might be talking more about how these ideas, assumptions, values are aligned, but there might still be some small differences. And contrastingly, collide obviously reflects a contrast and a clash in ideas or representations. So it's kind of a dissonance, you might say. And once again, that goes back to common and disparate. So common, you're thinking resonance, mirror, align. Disparate, you're thinking dissonance, collide. And for these, it's very important to think about the purpose of the composer when you're analyzing these language concepts. And this will drive your analysis and allow you to engage with contextual components, because obviously a composer's purpose is going to be very influenced by the context that they're writing their piece in, and the historical, social, moral values and perspectives that operate within that context. Okay, so that leads us into context. What do we gain from textual conversations? So we can reflect on what values are important to particular audiences and how these values have developed over time. So over time, we might be seeing dissonances, some changes, or how certain values transcend time. So there's resonances there. Then we're looking at how texts exist beyond contextual bounds. What does this say about enduring issues, values, and assumptions? Essentially, texts are a collage of history, engaging with the present audience whilst influencing the future. So we can see the scope of time there. And obviously, what does time relate to? It relates to context. So we have to relate everything back to context for this module. You're going to mention context in the intro, and every paragraph, you're going to be thinking about context and comparing the context between the texts. So how does the context influence the textual conversation? Perhaps there are contextual dissonances, but also resonances in values, ideas, and betrayal of these ideas, despite these jarring contexts. So just taking you through how to structure this module, that your responses for this module. there are kind of two ways you can approach this, because you're obviously talking about two texts. So you can integrate those texts into one paragraph. So you might have one theme and you're talking about both texts within that paragraph, etc., etc. Or you might use separate paragraphs where you have a theme, you talk about how that point relates to your first text, the parent text, and then how that theme relates to your second text. And then the same for the next theme. So you're aiming for 4 shorter paragraphs there, and then 3 paragraphs for the integrated approach. Now, there's pros and cons to both. You probably have an idea of which one you're going to use as you go into the exam, but I just want to reiterate that if you're using integrated paragraphs, you need to make sure your ideas are still clearly articulated and your analysis of each text is not confused. And if you're using separate paragraphs, you need to make sure you're still engaging with this idea of textual conversations and the discussion between the two texts. You don't want to just treat each text as separate from each other. Otherwise, you're falling into the trap of just treating it like a stark comparison. It still has to be nuanced, and you still have to be continually drawing the connections between the two texts and how these texts are reflecting common disparate values, assumptions, resonances, dissonances, all of that stuff we talked about previously. Okay, so I've got a little example of the 2 ways you might approach it. This is for Looking for Richard and King Richard III. Here's an example of an integrated paragraph. So we can see we've got all of our techniques or language features or features of form in green. And then we've got these big ideas in yellow, which relate to the rubric. So if we read through it, we can see we're starting off with an analysis of King Richard III, the parent text. And then we go into Pacino, who is reimagining King Richard III. He mirrors Shakespeare's emphasis on language and performance through his use of method acting. And then we're expanding of that. In stating this, the duality of Pacino as both an actor and director is established. And then we're relating that to the theme of the paragraph. This paragraph theme is about deceit and duplicity. And we're going through a few other techniques, and then how those techniques align with Shakespeare's use of performance. So we're going back to Shakespeare now. And then we finish with a sentence that expresses the conversation that both Shakespeare and Pacino are having with each other through their texts. So yeah, you can see there, we're working these ideas in throughout, and we're kind of going back and forth between each text, but it's still clear what text we're talking about and how the representations of ideas either align or collide with the opposing text. This is another way you might want to do it with separate paragraphs. So we're still exploring this theme of duplicity and deceit. Just starting with the parent text, we can see that the first paragraph uses less of these ideas related to the rubric, and it's more about setting up the context and the representation, which you then analyze in the second paragraph. So we can see all of these yellow quotes using words from the rubric, reframe, synonyms for that, reinvent, we've got reimagine, inviting a conversation, and then you can also see there we've got allusions to the Elizabethan landscape in the first paragraph, so the context that Shakespeare is influenced by, and then the context that Pacino is influenced by in his secular and individual lens in this postmodern context. So yeah, you have, there are two ways to do it. It just depends what works for you. One way isn't necessarily better than the other, but you just want to make sure you're still, if you're separating them, you're still engaging with this idea of a conversation. And if you feel like the word conversation is becoming repetitive as you're writing your essay, you can think of some other words you might want to use. So discourse is a good one, discussion, engagement, dialogue, and then also words for like reframing. You can see we've used reinventing. Yeah, you want to be engaging with the rubric, but you don't want to just be using the same word over and over again. So you might want to spice it up a bit too. Okay, I'll go through some questions now. Okay, how many quotes overall for an essay would you recommend? I think I kind of spoke about this earlier. It's hard to say an exact amount. I think I like to memorize quite short quotes, even like 1-word quotes. I'll show you in the next module how to do that. 1-word, 2-word quotes. I would avoid using really long quotes because first of all, they're hard to remember, and second of all, it's hard to dissect their meaning. So for one essay, I would be memorizing at least 10 quotes and then selecting which ones are most applicable to the question and what you're arguing. Also remembering you can use features that aren't necessarily quotes. I've heard from my teachers that you can still get full marks without a conclusion as long as the analysis is good. Yes, you can still get good marks without a conclusion, but I still do think it's very important that you're wrapping up everything that you've said. Like you've got these different ideas going on and you need to bring that all together somehow. So just think about how you want to be using your time there. If you're writing block paragraphs, how can you show you're comparing, connecting both texts? I think I spoke about that, just making sure in the second paragraph, you're relating it back to the first and using these ideas within the rubric. Can you go into a bit of detail about disturbing grand narratives? Does it mean physically altering, manipulating, changing in some way? Yeah, so to disturb a grand narrative is to kind of challenge the assumptions of to challenge the assumptions of a historical idea. So how is your text, I guess through dissonances, there might be some sort of disturbance there, and like we're challenging these previously assumed ideas. Can I do integrated paragraphs for 2 themes, as in write only 2 paragraphs? Yeah, I think you can. You just don't want to you just want to make sure your paragraphs aren't getting too long. So yeah. And also, yeah, I would just try, if you're doing 2 integrated paragraphs, you don't want to make sure you want to make sure you don't become confused with your argument. If you're writing a really long paragraph, you can kind of lose the train of thought that your paragraph is structured around. So yeah, I just be careful with that. Yes, a question about shortening the titles. You can shorten the titles, but the first time you introduce the title, so looking for Richard, you're underlining looking for Richard, or putting it in quotation marks, and then in brackets you're putting LFR. So you need to make sure that the first time you need to make sure you're introducing it after you've written the full text, the name of the full text. Oh yeah, so in the separated structure, would you refer to the Genesis text or the adaptation first? Always the Genesis first. The text that historically comes first is the one you're talking about first, and then you're talking about the interpretation second. Should you include act and scene number with your quotes? I think sometimes that can be quite useful to show if you're showing the development of the plot or the development of ideas. You're giving context to where this quote is coming from. So yeah, that can be quite useful, but it's not the be all and end all by any means. Is it recommended to write a context paragraph after your intro? I don't think you need to devote a whole paragraph to context. You just want to be saying a little bit about context in the intro and making sure you're relating each paragraph back to context. So just working that through your whole essay. Okay, I think, let's check. So I got a question about how your appreciation has been enhanced by the textual conversation. For these questions, other than the term appreciation, what other words would you be using to compare analysis? I'm not sure if you mean what other words for appreciation or what words you mean for mirror, align, collide, etc. But I think I've been through the words for mirror, align, and collide. So yeah, sorry, I'm a bit confused by that question. Do you have any tips for not overriding when structuring the Richard essay in 4 paragraphs? Attend directly. Okay, yeah, so that just goes back to a time management question in terms of overriding. So you have 40 minutes, you're writing 4 short paragraphs with an intro and conclusion. So I'd say you're averaging around 7 to 8 minutes per paragraph, if I've done my maths correctly, to give you time to still write a strong intro and conclusion. So yeah, you just want to be really structured with time. Okay. I think I've answered most of those questions there. So I might move on to the next module, which is module B, critical study of literature. So here we're looking at an understanding of the distinctive qualities of the text, notions of textual integrity and significance, closely analyzing the text construction, content, and language. So construction, how these ideas are portrayed, the content, the ideas themselves, and the language. So that's related to like voice, syntax, diction, as well as these broader language features that we've been speaking about. Evaluate notions of context. Once again, we're going back to context with regards to the text composition. So It's like construction, how it's composed, put together, and reception, so how it's received by audiences. Investigate and evaluate the perspective of others, and explore the ideas in the text, further strengthening their informed personal perspective. So you want to be considering your own perspective as well as the perspective of a broader audience, and maybe an audience that you don't necessarily fit into. So we'll go through that in a moment. And you're using appropriate register, structure, and modality. So in your own work, that's how you're writing your essay, because this module is very evaluative. It's important to have high modality when you're writing, but once again, we'll go through that in a moment. And you're offering a considered perspective of the text value and meaning. Okay. So what is textual integrity? This is very important for this module. Once again, this definition is from the syllabus glossary, and textual integrity is referring to the unity of text. It's a coherent use of form and language to produce an integrated whole in terms of meaning and value. So we can see that a text is influenced by these contexts. That affects how it's composed, its composition, which is the connection between language, ideas, and form. And then that affects its reception, so how it's interpreted by different audiences. And all of that comes together and equals textual integrity. Okay. Now, how are we ensuring that we have an informed personal perspective? So this means that we need a clear opinion about your text significant and whether it has textual integrity. Informed means why. So why do you think that? You might establish a criteria for textual integrity in your introduction. So maybe 3 main things that uphold textual integrity. So whether that means applicable to a range of audiences, transcending contexts, etc., etc. So like I said, it's very evaluative. You're giving a judgment, so you want to use modal language effectively, insightfully, jarringly, paradoxically. You can work those kind of words into your analysis quite effectively. And back to context again. So that's a definition of context from the syllabus. So you can see we're looking at these personal, social, historical, cultural, and workplace spheres, and how that influences a text's reception and composition. Does the text reflect, challenge, or inform its context? How is the author's context reflected in the composition of their work? So we've kind of got this reciprocal connection there. Evaluating the perspectives of others. So you might be aware that that it's an option to consider scholars and articles when evaluating the text, but you have to be really careful if you're doing this to still ensure you're offering your own personal perspective. At the end of the day, the marker is more concerned with what you have to say than what some scholar has to say. So if you are using quotes from scholars, make sure that you're just using short quotes that are integrated into your own syntax. And that quote has to give weight to your own argument, or maybe it's offering a different perspective. So make sure you understand why that perspective is different and explain that. So don't use quotes without understanding their meaning and context, obviously. You want to read a scholar's work in light of the rubric rather than reading it aimlessly, and you want to apply their perspective to support textual elements you have identified. You don't want to use their perspective as your own, like I was saying. Okay, so in terms of structure for mod B, your structure will influence how you evaluate textual integrity and significance. Like I was saying, you might have a criteria that you use to evaluate textual integrity. You might have 3 points. They might then form your 3 points in which you structure your essay around. That's obviously not prescriptive, it's related to the question, just an idea. Your thesis is going to be about how form and language interact to produce meaning and value in light of a particular context. And the specific question will obviously influence what this meaning and value is. So for each paragraph, once again, you want to focus on a key idea of the text and what meaning this produces for particular audiences as in yourself, as well as these broader audiences, scholars, etc. Because obviously broad audiences goes back to the idea of textual integrity. So you want to evaluate language features and form, try to link the two if you can. And like I said, they don't always include quotes, broad features just as effective. And making sure to analyze, you explain the implication of that feature. What is its meaning and value for audiences, specifically you? Finally, link your paragraph ideas back to the question, and even better, you're linking your analysis to the question as you go. Okay. So a little example here, if you want to have a quick read through that, and then I'll deconstruct that for you. Okay, so we have, through the juxtaposition of the naturally illuminative, oh, by the way, sorry, this is from David Malouf's Earth Hour text for Mod B. This isn't a super common text, I know, but this was the text I studied. So yeah, once again, the ideas that I'm the ideas that I'm trying to get across are common for all text, but this is just an example. So we have, like I said, these one-word quotes that are built into your own syntax, and you're kind of analyzing it as you go through. So naturally illuminative moonlit and the transparency of man-made glow.
Is she frozen for everyone or just me? Give me a thumbs up. Let me quickly send her a message. Sorry, guys. Just bear with me for a moment. I think Michaela's uni internet has just dropped out. So I'll get her back in and we will continue. Feel free to take a proper break because we've been going pretty hard for the last hour and a bit. So we'll probably be back in a minute or two, but give yourselves a second if you'd like. I'll get her back in. If you guys have more questions, please just send them into the Q&A box. It's we're just checking that like more commonly. So some of the questions in the chat haven't been, I think most of them have been answered. There might be a couple that are left, but just in case, send them into the Q&A just because we're kind of marking them off as we're going. So that's a little bit better because we'll see them a bit quicker, but we will check the messages as well if you guys send them to either location. Cool. All right. She's just setting up hotspot. It's a classic uni outage. So sorry about that. Bear with us. You guys will understand next year. I can't really talk to you guys, which is a bit awkward, but I'll jump into the message and just reply to people's messages. Just feel free to ask general questions if you've got them. Taranpreet is asking, where can I find links to the other webinars, for example, physics and bio? I found the link for this one on the VC discussion page. I'll just send a link into the chat because we've got a bunch of other free events because the reason we're running this stuff is that it's been pretty shitty for you guys in Sydney. Like I'm in Melbourne and we've copped it pretty bad, obviously, arguably worse than you. But stuff's been really bad because you guys have just been in lockdown for so long. So we're just running this stuff for free because we haven't really done events before. So your feedback is always really appreciated. We'll just have a bit of a post-event survey that we send out afterwards, but you guys are more than welcome to sign up for other ones as well. I just sent a link into the chat, so you guys can sign up for other events there. You should be able to see all the ones that are still coming up. But it looks like Michaela's back. Are you on hotspot now?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Cool. No, all good, all good. Go for it. I'll let you resume. I think everyone's still just was waiting, so we're all good now.
Thank you everyone for bearing with me there. I'll just take off where I left off. Oh, no, that's not right. Okay, so we were up to it, analyzing this little excerpt. I think we got up to despite this. So what I was saying for that, it's really valuable to offer a counter argument because it shows that you have this considered perspective of meaning. And then we're going through, he's offering a sentiment of hope and possibility in his contemplative state. So just for a bit of context, David Malouf is an older author and he seems to be quite contemplative as he approaches death. So the wider essay would be about that. And yeah, that's just alluding to context there. Transitioning from a critical to a propitious tone. So once again, we've got this broader feature. And then we're saying this is facilitated through the sonnet structure. So we're linking voice and language to form. And that's really useful because the rubric is talking about voice, form and language. And by showing how these two interact, you're really elevating your analysis. So facilitated through the sonnet structure, which is obviously part of poetry, which is David Malouf's text. It's a essay of poems, and the volta, we are feral at heart, may not necessarily be as diabolical as once assumed. So the volta is this tonal shift, which we obviously alluded to earlier. Okay, so that kind of wraps up my mod B. So I'll take questions now if you guys have any for mod B. I don't know if I lost some of the questions when I disconnected. So
can you see them in Q&A? There's a couple that have come up.
Yeah, I can't see any at the moment.
All good. I'll send them into the chat. So a couple of anonymous questions have popped up. Easy. If you take a look in the chat, you should see a couple coming through.
Sounds good. And thank you guys for all these questions. These are really good questions. And if I'm not answering them fully, just clarify what you mean and I might be able to give a better answer. Can you please explain what it means by textual integrity and significance? I don't really get how to answer that though. So I can take you back to the slide here. This is textual integrity. Basically, it's how the ideas in a text are enduring across different times, audiences, places. And the composition of a text, so the language, form, and ideas are what make up textual integrity. So yeah, it's this interaction between composition and reception. So how can you show how to answer construction questions? What points could click top 3? So can you show how to answer construction questions? What points could we make? I'm assuming you mean like how the text is composed to give a certain idea. I think a question will kind of direct you to what idea is related to a text composition. So it's hard to give you points because it's going to be very dependent on the question. But yeah, if it's a how question or a composition question, you can, I would still suggest structuring your points around ideas and then going into the analysis of language and form to show how these ideas are composed in the text. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily structure it around features, but still around ideas. And then a construction question is quite good actually, because you're analyzing despite what question it is. So yeah, it's kind of killing two birds with one stone if you have a composition question. How do we incorporate our personal perspective? So there's a bit of an urban myth that in essays you can't use personal pronouns like I and we, but you definitely can, especially when it's asking you for your personal perspective. So yeah, that's just such a good way, a good and easy way to show that you have a considered personal perspective by using I and we throughout your essay. For example, to what extent has a novel's construction contributed to your appreciation of its insights about relationships? Okay, yeah, so construction, once again, the construction is just how your author shapes meaning. So it's about an appreciation of its insights about relationships. So like I said, that's the meaning that your author is trying to portray. You'd structure your essay there around these insights about relationships. So maybe one point on the relationship with yourself, and then another point on your relationship with friends or something like that. I don't know what text you're studying, but yeah, that's what you would structure your essay around. Obviously, just an idea, but that's how I would probably go about it. What needs to be in the conclusion? Good question. So like I said, your conclusion should offer some food for thought. It's obviously summing up your whole essay. So you want to devote about 3 sentences to a conclusion, I would say. So you're kind of rewording your thesis, but then you're also offering something new. So maybe like leave the marker with something to think about, like kind of like an opposing thought. Yeah, and that shows like you're considering where these ideas are going to go in the future, maybe how these ideas might evolve, change especially as audiences mature, etc. Is it good to incorporate context about the author, e.g. Maloof? Yes, that is a very effective way to show how the author has shaped meaning, which goes back to textual integrity, influenced by personal, social, political, artistic context. So I would suggest in the intro giving some sort of statement about the context of the author and how that context, whether it be personal, social, political, how that shapes their ideas, language, etc. How would we answer a form-specific question? Good idea. So form is obviously related to the type of text you're studying. So for me, it was poetry. For others, it might be a novel, a film, etc. So a form-specific question, you want to show how that form relates to ideas and language, and then how the context influences the form, and then how the form influences your reception as a reader. So everything's going back to this textual integrity and the connection between these three stages. So the context, the composition, and the reception. How many paragraphs should we write for module B? I think 3 paragraphs for mod B. Once again, hard to say how many quotes each. Maybe 3 to 5 quotes with some overarching elements per paragraph. I think that's a reasonable amount. How can we tell each of our analysis of each quote is meaningful and adds value in the essay? Good question. To know that each quote is adding value, you need to be able to connect its implication to the question. So whatever that quote does, whatever meaning that quote is trying to portray, how does that meaning then relate to the question? If the quote has no connection to the question, it's not worth using it, essentially. And yeah, you can obviously kind of, when you go into an exam, you're kind of spinning these implications. Like you don't always have the meaning, like the meaning can't always be memorized. Like you might have your quotes memorized, but the meaning that you imply is obviously going to depend on the question. So you need to be flexible, able to work on the spot and think, okay, I've got this quote here. How can I connect this quote to my point, which then relates back to the question, if you know what I mean. So yeah, be flexible and be able to interpret and reinterpret your quote, but not to the extent that you've just gone completely off the grid and it's just so unrelated. Like just be a bit realistic with it. Okay. Okay, when integrating critical perspectives, would you recommend us including it in the topic sentence of the body paragraph to set up our argument? I definitely think you should avoid using critical perspectives, scholars, etc. in a topic sentence. You want to make sure the topic sentences are your own and are related to the question. You might just throw in something about, like you might just throw in a critical perspective as you're analyzing and say how that critical perspective is linked to this evidence that you found in your text and is also linked to your own perspective. So yeah, I would avoid using it for your own point. It's just kind of to the critical perspectives are there to show diversity and how your text is appeasing different audiences. and how these audiences are gaining perhaps different or similar things from a text. Okay. I think I've answered all the questions there. Just check. Oh yeah, how do we include quotes in our paragraphs without it seeming clunky? So we want to work it into our syntax, as I was saying, like we're using short quotes, and as in the example that I showed earlier, a short one-word quote, which we're like deconstructing in the sentence, is a good way to be really eloquent with your writing and not just make it so like jarring, if you know what I mean. Is using a scholar's idea critical to high marks? To be honest, I don't think it is. In my trials and HSC, I didn't use scholars' work and I still did quite well. So it's not the be all and end all. The main focus is using your own personal voice and showing how you've interpreted your text in your personal context. Only use it if it gives weight to your argument, or if you're using it to show a different perspective and why that perspective is different. Okay. I think we'll move on to Mod C now. So Mod C, we've got the craft of writing. So the marker, for Mod C, we're writing for a range of audiences and purposes. And we're also looking at prescribed texts that do this as well, and how these prescribed texts inspire our own writing. We're using language to convey ideas and emotions with power and precision. And like I said, you'll study at least 2 short prescribed texts, as well as texts from your own wide reading. So that's a really good way to differentiate yourself, is in your original piece, not the reflection, but the actual piece you're writing. You're giving intertextuality and allusions to other texts that you've read, and how the reading process has influenced your writing process. So yeah, it's about the reading and writing connection. Evaluate how writers use language for a range of purposes. And then we've got some examples of purposes there that are from the rubric: expressing insights, evoking emotion, describing the wonder of the natural world, shaping a perspective, sharing an aesthetic vision. So keep those purposes in mind when you're writing your work and you're also reflecting on your work. Evaluate the versatility, power, and aesthetics of language. So that kind of goes back to those purposes. Like I said, the process of writing. So the process of writing is linked to reading, how reading influences your writing. Textual forms and features. So we've got figurative, rhetorical, and linguistic devices such as allusion, imagery, narrative voice, characterization, tone, etc. And once again, relating it back to these bigger ideas: purpose, audience, context, and how these shape meaning. So you can see that there's definitely overlaps across the modules. We're always thinking about audience, context, purpose, form. Like, really make sure you're clear on what each of those are for each module. And when you're preparing, just literally like write sentences on how context shapes meaning, and you'll be able to apply those kind of ideas across questions and throughout your essay in your body paragraphs as well. Okay, so we've got the 3 textual forms that the syllabus mentions. Firstly, we have persuasive. So we're looking for a clear argument that drives a piece to a strong conclusion. Some devices that you will be considering might be alliteration, a climax or a tonal shift, a tricolon, so that's the power of 3, And then we have the 4 rhetorical appeals. So logos, which is an appeal to logic. You might be using substantive prose and strong reductive reasoning. Pathos, which is an appeal to motion and thinking what emotion specifically, which goes back to the rubric as well. Ethos, which is an appeal to credibility through character and ethics. And kairos, which is an appeal to timing. The persuasive piece might encourage you to take quick action, and you might be thinking about the ways in which the piece is creating this sense of urgency. Perhaps there's a motif of a timeline, high modality language, etc. Okay, discursive. So you're probably less familiar with this form, so I'll take you through it. Essentially, it's a conversation with the reader that offers both sides. So rhetorical questions are a really good way to make sure you're creating this conversation. I'll read you what the syllabus describes as a discursive text. So discursive texts are those whose primary focus is to explore an idea or a variety of topics. These texts involve the discussion of an idea or opinions without the direct intention of persuading the reader. So it's not a persuasive to adopt any single point of view. So we're not dealing with one clear point of view. We're kind of considering all options. Discursive texts can be humorous or serious in tone and can have a formal or informal register. So you can be very flexible with a discursive. It's fluid. It's nothing too prescriptive. These texts include texts such as feature articles, creative nonfiction, blogs, personal essays, etc. So you might consider how a discursive can be, you can apply it to something more specific, like an article, a speech, a blog, and that can help with your reflection. Okay, and there's some main features that are inherent to a discursive piece. It's all about establishing a personal voice. So we've got things like analogy, anecdote, a conversational tone, syntax, first person. Although you can use third person, but I would consider first person just to make it a bit more conversational. You can use figurative language, or it might be more factual, draw upon real life experiences and draw from wide reading, use engaging imagery, and resolutions may be reflective or open-ended. So unlike a persuasive, you're not coming to a clear resolution per se. It's a little bit more, open-ended than that. Okay, and then finally we have imaginative. So a really good way to differentiate your imaginative from others is to subvert structural expectations. So traditionally, an imaginative follows a beginning, middle, and end. Consider a non-linear narrative that might just focus on the end or might just focus on the beginning. That way you can really give like detailed imagery as to this specific moment. And it's a lot more effective than just giving this kind of broad, unspecific plot that's really poorly focused. Like we want to give something really detailed and focused, especially since we only have 40 minutes and often Mod C is split into 2 sections, which is writing your piece and reflecting on it. So you might only have 20 minutes to write something. It's better to make it really specific and detailed with dense imagery, really well thought out motifs and symbolism. So that's how you're going to differentiate yourself. Like I said, important textual features, consider perspective, a strong narrative voice, motif, dense imagery. We want to make it really detailed and show don't tell. So where you might want to use allusions. We're not just recounting a plot. We want to be really thought-provoking with this, and think about what emotions you want to evoke in your reader as you write an imaginative. And that emotion, I think, should be quite focused. There might be a shift in emotions that you're looking to provoke, but yeah, like I said, go back to that. This links back to the wheel of emotions that I showed you at the very beginning for the common mod, and try think about a really specific emotion that you're trying to evoke in your reader. And focus on language and expression as opposed to plot, as I said before. So yeah, don't get carried away with coming up with this really exciting plot twist. Like realistically, you just don't have enough time to do that. Okay. Ooh. So how to prepare, you might consider an analogy, anecdote, or extended metaphor that can be applied across different forms. So you can get a question that asks you to consider a specific form, or you may have a choice across the three. Essentially, texts can be hybrids of these forms. Like it's hard to say something is a persuasive, a discursive, or an imaginative. They are kind of like, there's definitely overlap. So yeah, but your question or stimulus will determine your use of form and what form might be appropriate to the audience, purpose, and context. So it's all about being flexible with your writing. The module has been designed to test your writing ability. It's called the craft of writing, not the content of writing. So it's about how you write, and less about how you analyze text as opposed to the previous modules. So consider intertextuality of own wider reading. As I mentioned earlier, that's going to be a way to differentiate yourself, and you're integrating that wide reading into your piece, as I said, as opposed to the reflective, where the reflective is you're integrating the prescribed texts. So yeah, try to distinguish the wide reading from the prescribed text. Choose 3 overarching features for each form and example from the prescribed text. So you might choose first person voice, tone and motif. And then you're thinking how you're going to include those 3 features in your own work, as well as how those 3 features have been used in the prescribed text. Okay. And for the prescribed text, you don't necessarily need a quote. It's more about your writing. So a general example is fine, but make sure you quote from your own work in the reflection. And I'll just go through quickly how to structure your reflection. So you probably only have about 20 minutes for a reflection, depending on the mark allocation. So yeah, if it's 10 and 10, you've got 20 minutes for the piece, 20 minutes for the reflection. Usually the piece might be like more around 12, so 12 and 8. You've got a bit more to write the piece. Just consider the mark allocation there and how you're going to devote your time. But yeah, you want a mini intro and conclusion that is directed at the question. So the question might say, like, how does your piece evoke a particular emotion? And then, so you want to clearly say what that emotion is and the 3 ways in which it does it. And then you're going to go in detail into those 3 ways. So you'll devote a paragraph to each technique. Yeah, and also it'll probably say how you evoke an emotion and how that is influenced by your engagement with prescribed texts. So you want to have specific quotes from your own work. As you can see here on the left, this is what Nessa has put out regarding what is involved in reflective writing. So first person to express self-assessment. So I used this technique, etc. Evaluative language. So did you use that effectively or not? If you don't think it was effective, say that. Considered use of examples, as I said. And yeah, we want to have like self-awareness in this learning process, maybe thinking about like how the reading influenced your writing, etc. And yeah, it can be objective or subjective, but consider using I to show that it's like maybe more subjective, and then maybe use a more objective perspective when you're evaluating the use of your technique. So yeah, here's just a quick way that you might want to organize your study. You've just got a little quote. You don't necessarily need to remember that quote, but just remember like the general idea, the technique that's used, and its effect. And then obviously you have the piece that you write, depends on the question on the day, but yeah, you kind of want to get a similar kind of system going in your head as you're planning your reflection. Think, okay, what are the main techniques I've used? What are some quotes to show the implementation of that technique? And what is its effect? And the effect will be related to the question, obviously. So if it's an evoking an emotion, like how does it do that? Okay, that's basically everything for Mod B. It's you have to be very flexible. As I said before, you can't, like, you might have ideas about what you want to write about for each textual form, but you really have to be able to think of something new on the day that's related to the question. You might get a stimulus. I know for my year, we got like a short little paragraph, and it asked us to continue on from that excerpt. So yeah, and we had the choice of which language form we wanted to use. So yeah, you can use your own, it's up to you to discern which which textual form is most appropriate, but be selective and think about how you're going to respond to the reflection as you're writing your main piece. Okay, so if anyone has any questions about that module or any overarching questions, I'll be happy to take those now. What do they mean by shapes meaning? That basically means how does it convey the idea that your author is trying to portray to certain audiences. So yeah, meaning is an idea essentially, and how that language or that form evokes that idea. Can you talk about what you wrote about in your Mod C exam? Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So I kind of had a general, like, I kind of planned out a little piece that I could hopefully adapt across forms. It was about this image of birds and like someone just observing that flock of birds from their window as their partner had just left them. And so I was, kind of willing to adapt that to the question and across modules. So yeah, I had some like really dense imagery in mind as I was going into Mod C. But once again, I just reinforce the fact that you need to be flexible, and it's not always good to have something like memorized, even though we can really have the tendency to want to just like know what we're writing. Just try be a little bit more fluid with it. So what is the structure of a discursive text? So like I was saying, a discursive is a little bit less prescriptive than a persuasive. You still want to have an intro and conclusion, but you can have short paragraphs, long paragraphs. It can be really diverse. So It's kind of up to you how you want to structure a discursive, and it depends what specific form you're taking on. So if you're taking on a blog, you might not even have a conclusion. You might just have like a one-liner at the end. If you're taking on a feature article, it might be a little bit more structured. It's kind of up to you, and the ball's in your court there. Any tips on showing and not telling? I just say, don't get carried away with plot there. Just really try focus on like perspective, voice. I would say for imaginative, it's really effective to switch up your sentence structure, like contrasting really short truncated sentences with more extended sentences is a really effective way to make certain moments in the imaginative stand out. So yeah, you might consider those things. How many quotes do we need for one reflective body paragraph? 1 to 2 is fine. Like you don't have long, so yeah, I wouldn't get too caught up on quotes, and you know, you can just quickly flick back to your piece you just wrote, even just a couple words, like that's all it really requires. Okay, I think I've answered all those questions there. If anyone has like any broad questions just about like a general approach to the exam, ask away. Personally, what was your favorite module? My favorite module was the common module, definitely. If you guys want to like leave in the chat what your favorite module is, I'd be curious to know. Oh, thank you. I'm glad it was helpful. And yeah, if you want any more help, you can definitely book me or some of the other great tutors here. Yeah, I know you guys don't have too long until your exam, I think about a month, but you can do a lot in a month. And yeah, it's a really important time to refine all your skills. You've probably got some ideas, but you really want to be refining the way you use language to articulate those ideas. And yeah, it's a big time, I know. So I hope you're all going okay, especially in lockdown, because I know it's probably been pretty challenging. Okay. I think I had a question earlier about ANU, maybe like what college I'm at. I can't quite remember. I'm at John's College, so yeah, it's really fun if you guys want to check it out. But yeah, ANU is great if you were considering.
I think there was one question in the chat for the common.
Oh yeah, someone said as well. For the common module, if we don't understand a text in the comprehension section, what do you think we should do in that moment? Like honestly, the comprehension is all about how you interpret it. Like the good thing about English, there isn't always a clear answer. It's really like quite subjective. So just try to think of some interpretation. It doesn't really matter if you're not right on the money, but think of some idea and like what that piece does for you. And then just go with that, roll with it. Don't look back and just think, okay, I've got my idea now. Now, what are a few techniques that the author uses to show this idea? Like, yeah, I would just try not to second guess yourself too much in the exam, and you don't want to waste time thinking, is this what it is? Is this what it is? Like, just choose something and go with it. Is probably my best advice for that. In terms of other subjects that I did for the HSC, I did Studies of Religion 2 unit and Legal Studies, and they were those two along with English were my favorite subjects and the ones I did the best in. I got a band 6 in all of those. And then I got a high band 5 in economics and bio. So I still liked economics and bio, but to be honest, I didn't really devote as much time to those 2 subjects. I was really like enjoying studying for the other 3, and that was reflected in my marks. And then I also did advanced maths, but because I was doing 12 units, I knew that advanced maths wasn't going to count. And I was sort of just doing it to keep my options open for uni, because I know at one point Sydney had like advanced maths set as a prerequisite to get into some of the courses that I was interested in. So I just kind of had to get a band 4 in that, and I just sort of did it to keep my options open, but I didn't really enjoy maths, so I focused on what I enjoyed.
I think that's everything. Does anyone else have any questions? Otherwise, it seems like we're all done. Any final tips, Michaela?
I think you guys will be great. Just make sure you stay composed in an exam. I think time management is so important for English. You need to be really careful with that, because it's so easy to get carried away with responses. It's not like other subjects where you've got short answer and multiple choice, where you can kind of gain time for these extended responses. So you just have to be super strict with time and go in with a bit of a game plan, how much time you're devoting to each paragraph. And yeah, I'm sure you'll be fine.
Cool. I feel like everyone's done with questions. So
Right.
yeah, thanks very much for attending, guys. There's a couple more lectures coming up over the next few days for other subjects. I sent the link to the events page in the chat, so you're more than welcome to check it out there, but I'll send it one more time. And after the event, a little bit after 6, we'll send you an email with a couple of links that you can use to access. And then this should go up on YouTube sometime in the next few days. So you guys will also get an email if you want to rewatch it, or if you want to look for any of the slides. It might just take a little while for us to process it all, but it should happen pretty soon. But yeah, if you guys want Michaela as a tutor, feel free to click on one of the links, scan a QR code, and get in touch with her. But otherwise, best of luck for English Advanced.
Yeah, good luck, guys.
Cool.
And yeah, we can be in contact if you guys are interested, but I'm sure you're all on the right track, and just by attending this lecture, I think you'll be headed in the right direction.
Cool. All right. Well, we might call it there, guys. Thanks very much for coming, as always, and hope to see you at a couple of the next few lectures. I'll be just like admin for a couple, and then Emma, who's another one of our tutors, will be admin for a couple. So hope to see you guys in the next few days as well, and good luck with the study. And thanks, Michaela. I'll message you and let you know about the feedback and stuff once we get some feedback from everyone.
Thanks, Manoj.
Cool. See you, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye.